Good morning and welcome to Todd and Shane's Cloudy Podcast number 392, recorded live Wednesday, June 6th, 2018. And this week is a special edition of the podcast, a special edition of Todd and Shane's podcast because there is no Shane. It is delightful. It is stupendous. I laughed, I cried. It's been very emotional. But yes, this week it is all me. None of that other guy whose name we probably don't even need to say anymore. Like, let's just, expunge all of those memories right now. So we'll start off with the production notes. I realized a couple of days ago that I had not produced last week's podcast yet. So that is halfway done right now. That should come out probably today. It's a pretty quick process once I get started, but I just have to remember to get started. And I did not last week. Been busy. So that will come out here in the next couple of days. And then the other thing that I want to talk to you for production notes is, of course, a word from our sponsor, SysKit, the makers of SP.Kit and a bunch of other great tools. And today is June 6th. There's no chance that this will be out before then. But for those of you that are in the chat room and that are listening to it live, tomorrow, June 7th at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, actually Eastern Daylight Time, or 4 p.m. Central European Time, the folks at SysKit are going to be doing a live webinar with a friend of mine, Gokin, and he will be talking about managing, monitoring, and analyzing SharePoint. You can go to syskit.com and sign up for that, but I have lovingly made you a short URL that will take you right to the registration. You can go to toddclint.com/syskitwebinar, SYSKIT webinar, and it'll take you right there. Free thing. If I didn't already have a customer engagement going on, I would be in there doing that, but I'm going to be busy, unfortunately. But enjoy that for free from the nice folks at SysKit. And now on to the topics. It has been a busy week. We always struggle, even when that other guy, whose name, he who shall not be named, and I are making the notes for the podcast, we're always worried about whether we will have enough to talk about. And then as we start putting the notes together, we realize that we have too much to talk about. And this last week is no exception to all of that. The big story that we have to talk about, even though it is not directly impacting the things that I do, but the big story for Microsoft News this week is that Microsoft bought GitHub. And it's fun these days, and I can say these days because I'm an old fart, but it's fun these days watching news evolve, because this was one of those stories where everybody wanted to get the lead quick. Everybody wanted to get the scoop on the story. So first it was, we're getting these whiffs that Microsoft might buy GitHub, and people are saying that maybe Microsoft has made a bid at GitHub, and it all is the story just started eking out. And then pretty soon, hey, Microsoft bought GitHub. So that is the big story this week. Microsoft announced that they bought the developer repository GitHub for $7.5 billion in stock. That's a lot of money. Let's take a moment to think about how much money that is, $7.5 billion. Obviously, that's a lot of money no matter what you're talking about, software, beans, whatever. $7.5 billion is a lot of money. And it's also a lot of money when you think of a couple of things. One of them was that GitHub was most recently valued at $2 billion. So this would be more, nearly 4 times as much. And that was just a couple of years ago. But I think what drove the price up so much, and Kyle in the chat room alluded to that, is that apparently Microsoft was not the only suitor for GitHub. Apparently the folks who owned GitHub, it was a private company, decided that now was the time to sell, and so they were courting offers. Microsoft was one of them. Google was another one. And so it's like any bidding war, the price just went up and up. So that's one thing. $7.5 billion is a lot when you consider the valuation was just $2 billion a couple of years ago. The other thing that makes it crazy is that this is the second largest Microsoft acquisition ever. So think of all the things that they've bought. This is the second largest one ever. The only one that was larger was LinkedIn, and they bought that for $27 billion. I think that record's going to stand for a little while. GitHub is primarily a developer repository. There's some other things in there because it's got good source control. So some things about things that aren't code necessarily have shown up in GitHub. But there are 85 million repositories there, so 85 million projects there. And that is just insane. But one of the other things that's interesting is Microsoft had the largest number of contributors to GitHub last year, a little over 16,000, and that was just edging out Google and Facebook. So Microsoft has said for a while that they are into the open source thing. They're into giving things back to the community, and certainly they put their money where their mouth was on that, literally with the purchase of GitHub, but also just all of the projects that have been out there. And again, over 16,000 contributors from Microsoft in the last year at GitHub. So it's an interesting time that they've been doing that. The owner of GitHub said that 10 years ago when he started GitHub, if he had ever thought of this headline, Microsoft buys GitHub, it would be hysterical, that he would have never thought about it. But now it's a thing that really happened. So it's interesting. One of the things in the chat room, Eric Van Roy mentioned that he's in favor of this as long as they don't Microsoft-ify it. And that has been the overwhelming sentiment that I have seen on, Twitter and all these other places, is people are worried about Microsoft doing evil Microsoft things with GitHub. And I'm kind of torn on that because I have seen that in some cases and I have not seen it in others. So if I think of some of the big acquisitions that have impacted me directly, Skype was a big one that happened a few years ago. And I think Skype itself, the service, is better for it. I think it's better now than it was when Microsoft bought it however many years ago. Unfortunately, it supplanted MSN Messenger, which I liked better. And there are still features that MSN Messenger had that Skype does not have and likely will never have. And so I think while the Skype product itself is better, the experience for end users is worse because there were some things inside of Messenger that I really liked. So I don't think Microsoftified that one. Yammer is another one. I don't think that Yammer itself is worse off. So I think if you were somebody who used Yammer and got used to Yammer, it probably still does all the things that you loved it to do. But I think for the non-Yammer folks, it has really made things confusing as to what tool to use for what. I'm not a big fan of Yammer. Didn't like it before the acquisition. Still don't use it much. So I struggle to find some of the examples of this, but I think what really drives these sentiments of people having an anti-Microsoft view on this is the Microsoft from 20 years ago, essentially. The Microsoft that existed pre, monopoly charges, those kind of things. And I think there's just a lot of people that is just their imprint of Microsoft. And when the antitrust lawsuit happened, and regardless of how it ended up, regardless of what Microsoft, the wins and losses that came out of that fundamentally changed Microsoft as a company. And Microsoft did a lot of really shady things before the antitrust suits happened, and I can name a bunch that I saw personally. But there hasn't been much of that lately. And specifically, there hasn't been much of that lately after Steve Ballmer stepped down. So the Satya Nadella time at Microsoft has been a completely different company than Microsoft was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So I think people's concern about Microsoft messing this up or being, doing something bad for the community, I don't think that is a legitimate concern. Now, they might not agree with the direction Microsoft takes it, but I don't know that you can assume nefarious intent at this point. But we'll see. For me, Mark Chrisman mentions in the chat room that he'd love it if different Office 365 SKUs could get private repos. I will be honest, that was exactly the very first thing that I thought. So for those of you that don't use GitHub, you can use GitHub for free. You can sign up for it and create a repository there. But everything you put up there is public, so people can search and find. And that's great. I've got some PowerShell scripts and stuff up there. But I've never fully embraced GitHub for things like PowerShell because I can't make things private without paying for GitHub. And I don't use GitHub enough to justify paying GitHub. So the very first thing I thought when they announced that was, man, I hope like through my MVP stuff or through one of my Office 365 subscriptions or something, I get the option for a private GitHub repo because I would use it. I would use it a lot more. The other thing with GitHub that's kind of frustrating is it's got a web interface, which obviously is easy enough to use, but there are also clients for Linux and Windows and Mac and all that. I've never had good luck with the Windows client, so that was my next thought was maybe the Windows GitHub desktop will be a little better, and I'll be able to use that once I get my private repo through my Office 365 subscription. So as you think about this, just remember this is not the Microsoft of the past, so don't let that darken your view. I think the GitHub thing will be good. really shows how serious Microsoft is about it. The other good thing about Microsoft acquiring GitHub was that immediately the internet jumped right on this when it came to memes, and there were just some great memes about Microsoft acquiring GitHub. And I think the biggest one, everybody's favorite Microsoft meme, Clippy, showed up in a bunch of these, and I've got a link from time.com that I'll put in the show notes. But things like jokes like Microsoft is now the first company to actually pay for anything on GitHub. The things like, Microsoft has so much stuff on GitHub, they realized it would be cheaper for them if they just bought GitHub than paid their monthly subscriptions. People were guessing about the different SKUs, GitHub for Business, GitHub Enterprise, GitHub Student, all kinds of great things. So it's been interesting. Another interesting thing about this is, again, GitHub is primarily a developer tool. And this week was Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference, WWDC, and they announced a bunch of new software things and all that. But I really feel, at least in the circles that I traveled, that the GitHub acquisition overshadowed the Apple WWDC thing. So it was an interesting week. So be curious to see how that all turns out. I'm watching my developer buddies to see what they think about it. But it was an interesting thing. I would have not guessed that was going to happen, but it was pretty cool. So that is kind of the big thing on news. And I've got a bunch of other things that I've seen through the week that I wanted to talk about. One of them was I was just cruising around reading Microsoft and knowledge base articles and blogs, as one does on Friday and Saturday nights here at the Clint household. And I stumbled across one called Best Practices for Using Office 365 DNS Records. And I thought that was a really good one. And I read through it because, I like Office 365. I like DNS. It's all things that I like. And it mentioned a bunch of different things. And there was kind of two different classes of best practices in here. One of them was there have been DNS practices that have changed over the years, different places to point things, different kinds of records to use and things like that. So this was basically the Exchange team snapshot in, as of June of 2018. Here are the different records you should use. You should go through all your domains and make sure you're pointing at the right spots. Make sure you're not pointing at any of the old endpoints, things like that, because they've changed. And then there's just a bunch of other good practice DNS things. So one of the things that they talk about is having multiple MX records. So if you've been doing public internet mail for a while, MX is the mail exchanger record. That is how one mail server knows how to deliver mail for your domain. So I own the domain toddclint.com. When somebody at Microsoft wants to email me, the Microsoft.com email server looks at the email address, says, oh, it's for somebody at toddclint.com, goes out to DNS and looks up the MX record for toddclint.com, and then forwards the email onto that server. For a long time, it was common practice to have multiple MX records because you wanted to have backup mail servers. So if one server went down or became unavailable, your mail could route to the other one. But Microsoft is saying that don't do that now. If you're using Office 365, you don't need to do that. And the reason you don't need to do that is because we're doing that for you. And while it feels like you're pointing at a single machine and a single IP address, really in the background, we've got redundant this and redundant that. And by having multiple MX records, you're just making things more complicated. And the other thing is, potentially, if you're using different MX records, you might be circumventing things that they've got in place that checks for spam and all kinds of stuff. So only have one record. And again, that's guidance that's changed over the years. So this is a good refresher to read that. There's other things about, checking your DNS records. And then they talk about where inside of Office 365 you can see what your records should be. They show how to use NSLOOKUP to figure out what your things are currently set to. There's some internet utilities that will do it also. So I thought that was a good just kind of primer to see what things were set at. And so, yep. And Mark Chrisman brings up another thing. When you have your MX records, they can have weighting. So the 10 record comes before the 20 record when somebody's walking through. So you don't even have to mess with that anymore. If you're in Office 365, you create the one record, you point it where you go. And that's so. And Mark brings up another thing. These probably don't apply to your non-Office 365 mail systems, Probably not. This is very clearly a blog written by the Exchange team, so I think they probably don't care much about the other platforms. But I would guess the other platforms have similar things in place. I don't know. I don't have any like Gmail for business things set up, but I'm guessing they all do the same sort of things. But it's just a good time. You get these things, you put them in place, and then you move on to whatever the next fire is. And I liked this article because it reminded me to go back and look through some of my things, and actually gave me tangible things to do. Instead of just saying, look for your check your DNS records, and then go on. It says, check your DNS records. They should be this. You can use this tool to verify it. It was very prescriptive and all that. So I appreciated all that. It's a good record, or a good blog post to read through, and just a good one to kind of have in your back pocket. All right, what else was going on? So another interesting thing, a couple weeks ago was a SharePoint conference in Las Vegas, and it was very exciting. Still coming down from that. Still got to, still on the high from getting to hang out with all my friends and all the new things. I did an uncommon thing. I went to the keynote, Jeff Teeper's keynote, and a bunch of my other friends were there, Aaron Rimmer and Dan Holm and all those guys. And mostly those things are fluff. I get kind of bored with them, and I honestly got a little bored with this one. But at one point, as they're showing all the things, and they're showing the search-based this and the graph-based that, and having your things here, and all the crazy things that are coming up in Office 365, Jeff Teeper sort of made an offhanded comment that Microsoft imagines people's day starting at office.com. That's just their homepage, and when they sit down at work, they log in after they've stood at the coffee pot and chatted with their friends and all that. They go to office.com, and that is where they start being productive for the day. And this struck me as so many other, weird marketing things and just fluff and all that. And it kind of offended me. It was kind of dumb, but I started paying attention to it. When I got home, I started thinking about all the different times that I go to office.com, or that I go to things that would have been easier to get to from office.com. And so I just started doing that. I put a link in my favorites bar in Chrome, and I just started doing that. Every time I was like, well, I need to go to blah, and it was in SharePoint or whatever, I would just go to office.com. And it only took me about a day or two to realize that is a really good workflow. And so now I don't have it set as my browser homepage, but it is probably the favorite that I hit the most right after, all the funny cat video links that I've got. But so I've been doing this for a week or two, and then I was talking to a customer yesterday, and we were helping them figure out their Office 365 architecture, and she was talking about her end users. And this customer's been a real joy to work with because she is not classic IT. She kind of grew out of the user space. And so as an IT nerd, I get all excited about some cool new functionality that shows up in Office 365. And I'm like, we should do the thing and click the thing and do the thing, and it'll be great because it's really cool and whiz bang. And her first thought is always, what's the end user experience going to be? How do I train my end users to use this? So it's been a very thoughtful rollout, and her insight's been interesting. But we were talking about how certain things can get exposed. I'm giving her the regular talks about we should scale by site collections and this and that and the other thing. And she's like, well, how do I get my users to a place where they can find these things? Do they have to bookmark everything? And then it occurred to me, they should probably just go to office.com. And so, her and I we're doing the screen sharing thing, and sure enough, the thing that we had been working on that she was worried about surfacing, she went to office.com, and it was right there under her recently used files. And so it was really super cheesy. Everybody should start their day at office.com. Well, of course you think that, Jeff Teeper, because, that's your job. But then I started doing it, and it's actually not too bad. So something to consider for yourself or for your end users is if you've got, Office 365 email and you're using SharePoint Online and all that, consider making a bookmark to office.com and starting your day there, and see if that doesn't help. Another thing that I noticed as I was perusing through things is a couple of days ago, the folks at Microsoft also released a new version of the SharePoint Online Management Shell, the PowerShell for SharePoint Online. This has been something that I have mocked heartily over the last 3 or 4 years, and I would argue that it has deserved every rib and barb that I have given it. But over the last few months, it has gotten much, much better. And this month's release is no different. So this was released on June 4th, and it's version 16.0.7723. So you can go check what you've got now and see if you've got that one. We are up to 136 commandlets. By way of comparison, when I first started playing with this module 3 years ago, I think, it had 40, so they've added 100, and this is the official Microsoft one. This is the MVP, the minimum viable product that they put out, and it's now up to nearly 140 commandlets. And so they keep adding things to that. It's a pretty easy install. You can go to the download page. It's linked in the show notes, and download that and just install it over top of the one that you've got, and all of those things will show up. So go ahead and refresh that. If you do anything with SharePoint Online, anything with Office 365, you gotta keep up to date on those. While you're at it, while you're updating PowerShell modules, don't forget to update the Patterns and Practices PowerShell, which is not necessarily from Microsoft, but Microsoft adjacent. This is hosted in GitHub. See how that works. And it is a community product, but it is very guided by Microsoft, very sponsored by Microsoft, but it is not an official Microsoft product. But definitely go out while you're updating all these things and update the Patterns and Practices PowerShell. This is an interesting one since it is not a Microsoft product. There isn't a download.microsoft.com link for it. And so this one is out on GitHub, and you can use the NuGet PowerShell commands to update it. I will tell you, I have had no luck with that. That is at version 2.26.1805. So I mentioned that you can do a get module, SharePoint, PNP PowerShell star, and it will list the ones that you've got. In theory, you should be able to just do update module, SharePoint PNP PowerShell online, -4, so it should just update to the new one. That never works for me for any variety of reasons. One of them is I found one machine that I'd done this on in the last couple of days that had a several month old version, like 6 or 7 months old. And back in November or December, I forget which month it was, they quit signing that module with a thought key, encryption key, and Microsoft started signing it with their own key. So then those didn't match, and that would, anyway, I always trip up on that. So what I end up doing, the update module never works for me. So I have to do uninstall module, SharePoint PNP PowerShell online. Half the time I have to close PowerShell out for that to take effect. And then I do an install module, SharePoint PNP PowerShell, and then I do all of the switches to make that work. Skip publisher check, allow clobber, all those kind of things, and that will install the newest one. And it will go out to the internet. It'll go out to GitHub and grab that down. So we've got that now. And then while you're at it, make sure you go out and see the other necessity, the other important PowerShell module that I always add with these is the Azure AD module. And so you can get that a similar way. It's called the Azure AD PowerShell for Graph or something now. PowerShell for Graph. But don't let the graph thing confuse you. That is the Azure AD commandlets. In the chat room, Mark Chrisman mentions that it replaces the old MSOL module. On my machines, I have not gotten rid of the MSOL module, which is the old Microsoft Online one, because there are still a few things that it does better than the Azure AD one. Licensing is one of the things that it does a lot easier, and when you add a domain and you do all your confirmations and your DNS checks and all that, the Azure AD way is much more painful. So on my system, the MSOL module and the Azure AD module are like ebony and ivory, like the old Paul McCartney and Michael Jackson song. They live together in perfect harmony, and I just use them. Some commandlets I use from the Azure AD objects and some MSOL, but they're both good to have, and update them all. So go out there and get that. I probably should have moved this one farther up the list, but this is something I've been paying attention to for a while. So I speak at a lot of conferences, and I tell a lot of on-prem SharePoint administrators that they need to expand their horizons. SharePoint on-prem has a long, glorious life ahead of it. A couple of weeks ago, Microsoft announced the new version of SharePoint Server on-prem. There's going to be, it's going to come out later this year. There's much SharePoint on-prem work to do for years to come. But The landscape is changing. And so when I talk to SharePoint administrators about that, I talk about all the different things that they need to do. And almost all of it revolves around Office 365 in some way. It's things like getting comfortable with Azure Active Directory, figuring out what the graph is and how you can use it for yourself, how to set up hybrid between your on-prem SharePoint and SharePoint Online, all of these things. The problem is for a lot of these things, they require an Office 365 tenant to do all these things that I prescribe to them. The other place that this comes up is when I'm talking to customers who already have Office 365. I say, well, you need a first release tenant or you need to do this or that. And they're like, well, where do we do this? Because we've got our Office 365 tenant that's production. I can't play with all these things. I can't try all this authentication stuff you're telling me to try because it's a production tenant. So it comes up now and then that I need to find a way for people to play in Office 365 and without incurring, monthly fees of, $25 a user or something like that. And so there are a couple of different ways to do that, and one of them popped up on my radar here a week or so ago, and that is the developer subscription. So you can go to developer.microsoft.com and sign up there. It is a free sign up. It's going to ask you a bunch of questions about what you develop on, things like that. I know it feels dirty to say you're a developer, but you just got to do it. You got to suck it up, and then sign up for developer, get in there, and then you get a free 12-month subscription to Office 365. I think you only get like 1 or 2 licenses, something like that, but it is enough to get you in there, being able to sync users, being able to see the new things that are coming out, all that, and that is one way to get a free Office 365 tenant. And I've talked about these before, but I think I'll recap them anyway. So another way to get a free Office 365 tenant outside of this one is you can go to office.com and you can act like you're going to buy an Office 365 business tenant, an E3, E5, whatever. And they all have a try for free option, so you can get a trial tenant that way. I can't remember how long those last, but you can get a bunch of those. And that gives you a way to try this Office 365 tenant for free, get in there and do things. And then the third way is if you are associated with a Microsoft partner, you can go to demos.microsoft.com and sign up for a demo tenant. These again are I think 180-day trials or 90-day trials, something like that, limited, but they have all of everything you need. So you can sign up for one of these demo tenants for free. You can have up to 6 active at a time. And they spin them up immediately, and then they are ready to go immediately. So they have a bunch of users that are created. They've got a bunch of content, and I'm not talking just like sites created. I'm talking about full-fledged things, all of that, and that will get you in there. One thing that I will say is, regardless of which one you do, the developer one, the try it for free one, or the demos.microsoft.com one, if you do sync up, do the Azure AD thing, remember that you have to, put your internet domain, so like, toddclint.com or, catvideos.com, whatever. You have to associate that with your Azure AD tenant in there. You want to remove that before your tenant expires, because once your tenant expires, you can't log in and remove it yourself. So what I end up doing is every time you create one of these demo tenants, it tells you when it's going to expire. I immediately go into Outlook, and for a week before that date, I put in a reminder, go in there, remove this, do whatever, so I've not lost. Because I did lose one domain in there and had to call support and had to walk through the thing, and it was a very painful process because I'd forgotten about it. The tenant had expired. I tried the thing. I'd done it, forgotten about it. Months later, tried to do it again, tried to add a domain, and it said it was already added to an Office 365 tenant. And that's when it occurred to me what happened. Tried to log in, couldn't. Support ticket. It was pretty painful. So don't be that guy or gal. Just put a little reminder in Office 365. So in the chat room, Stacy asked, is there an idea how to get another free trial of Azure? I don't know how to get free Azure trials, but I've never tried. Now I know if you do the Office 365 thing, you get Azure AD for free, and Azure AD just has a free SKU also. So if you just want to do Azure for the identity things, that is all free, but I don't know how you would get the IaaS stuff. Might be ways to do it. I've just not looked at it. Our SharePoint on-prem folks, not to be forgotten, Saw this article this week about a fun little bug and a incredibly painful solution to this bug. So this is for SharePoint 2013 on-prem. If you're spinning up a new SharePoint 2013 farm, and that happens, I do this work for customers all the time, installing SharePoint. So one of the things that I always tell customers, I've got a worksheet that I give them before I jump in and do SharePoint, and one of the check boxes on that is I need Windows, the latest version of Windows that your company supports, that is, the latest version of Windows that is supported by the version of SharePoint that I'm installing that your company supports. And then patch it within an inch of its life. Windows update that thing, reboot, Windows update it again, keep going, and then that's when I step in, because I want all of the security patches, all of that stuff on there. So there's an interesting bug with SharePoint 2013. If you do that and the .NET Framework 4.6 gets installed, when you try to install SharePoint later, you will get an error that SharePoint or that .NET Framework 4.5 is not installed, where logic would tell you that 4.6 should work where 4.5 did, and you would be mostly right. But the SharePoint 2013 installer doesn't recognize it, doesn't understand it, can't do the math, and so it just bombs out. So Microsoft has a knowledge base article about that on what the problem is and what the solution is. And the solution is ugly. You basically have to expand out the SharePoint 2013 installation files, download a patch, and just go manually swap out some DLLs. It is pretty ugly. I'm guessing they'll end up fixing that at some point with the new installation media, but I'm not sure. But that is certainly very ugly. So I know that could trip some people up. Kevin in the chat room is saying, sadly, SharePoint has trained me never to update the .NET framework. That is a true story, Kevin. I have killed many SharePoint servers simply by doing Windows Update because of .NET framework things. Now, this mostly happened, SharePoint 2003, SharePoint 2007 days, but it is not an uncommon refrain that updating .NET. But this one seems safe because it was before SharePoint was ever installed. This was just the foundation. So one of those things, and Kyle's mentioning that 2016 had the same problem, same deal. So just keep an eye out for that. This is one of those knowledge base articles just to kind of remember, if you come up with this. So get that up. And one final story, kind of a fun story, as I was cruising through the news this morning. One of the things that interests me the most about all this cloud computing thing is, at heart, I'm really a server guy. Like, I just like going into cold rooms and wiring things and all that. If you do the Reddit thing, there's a subreddit about I can't remember what it's called, wiring porn or data center porn or something, but it's just pictures of like the back of computer racks with all the network cables. It just looks beautiful. Love that stuff. But these days, I don't do it much anymore because everything's up in the cloud. I've got a couple of servers here at home, but certainly nothing to satisfy that need for data center technology. But that was something that I always loved reading about, always do enjoy reading about. And so I saw this story today, and it really caught my attention. The headline was, Microsoft sinks data center off Orkney. And center was spelled C-E-N-T-R-E. So even if I wouldn't have known that Orkney was in the UK, I knew it was a European thing. So what Microsoft is doing, and they've done it before, and they're not the only ones that do it, but they built a data center that they just submerge. So they built this, this huge, well, not even that huge, I guess. I think they said it's like 12 server racks worth of servers. Built it in this watertight container and dropped it in the sea outside of Orkney, and there's a big cable going in with lots of electricity and a big cable coming out with lots of data, and it is just a data center node. And they're expecting to be able to use it for 5 years because obviously once you drop it in the sea, you can't fix anything. So it's just there. There's no repairing it. But they're doing this mostly for cooling purposes, because as densely packed as we have servers these days and all that, the amount of heat that gets generated is just insane, just almost unfathomable. And so cooling is one of those things that's tough to do, and it's tough to do in a responsible way. It's tough to do in a way that doesn't damage everything around it. I know some companies have data centers that do things like try to use river water to cool it, but then it raises the temperature of the river and it kills the fish and algae grows and cats and dogs live in harmony and it's all these terrible things. And so Microsoft's trying to do this now in the ocean. So folks in the chat room are already chatting about this. Immediately, the folks out there were worried about the oceans rising, but the ocean turns out is really freaking big. And while this little 12 rack data center puts out a lot of heat, the guy from Microsoft that was responding to the environmentalist said something about it 50 meters away, it raised the temperature of the water by like 1,000th of a degree. Now, I don't know if he meant Fahrenheit or Celsius. I get all confused over there in Europe, but I don't know that it matters at that aspect. It probably doesn't matter. So then Mark's bringing up the whole boil the ocean argument. Yeah. But I think this is one interesting way to deal with the cooling, though, again, the fact that you can't get in there is interesting. So I'll be curious to see how that, and I haven't looked in, my Azure tenant or anything to see if I can pick that Orkney data center and have my data held underwater. But I like where they're going with that. I like people thinking outside the box. Maybe we'll shoot some data centers into space. I don't know, something like that. So that is all the news and all the things that I want to talk about. We've got the community corner to talk about. So last week was SharePoint Saturday Montreal. Saw a lot of pictures from that. Was very jealous of the people that got to go to that. I had a much less fun day, but that looked like fun. But not to be ignored, SharePoint Saturday Charlotte is going to be going on August 11th. So go down and join those folks. And then August 20th, SharePoint Saturday, New England. I have gone to one of them. New England is beautiful, especially in the fall. You get there right when the leaves are turning. Can't be beat. So you can go out there to that one. That's in Burlington, Massachusetts. So that will be fun. A lot of my friends are going out there. I'm just unfortunately have stuff going on all those days, and I can't join any of those. But I will be in Boston August 26th through 29th for SPTechCon. You don't want to miss out on that. In Boston, Massachusetts, you can go to sptechcon.com and sign up for that. Shane and I are doing a bunch of sessions. Shane's doing a Power Apps all-day workshop the day before, and I'm going to be there looking pretty, getting him his tea and his water and, all those kind of things. And then we're going to be doing some sessions during the week, and I've forgotten to write down in my notes when those are going to happen. That will be happening. So if you're going to be out there, for goodness sakes, come find us, say hello. We're really friendly folks. We'd love to talk to you. And then they've already announced when the next SharePoint conference, I think we talked about this last week, the next SharePoint conference North America will be back at MGM Grand, May of 2019. It's like the 21st through the 23rd, something like that. Obviously, we're really early into the planning process for that, being that we're just 2 weeks after the last one. But I certainly hope that somewhere I figure in there, maybe I can be Bill Bear's pool boy, something, I don't know. But put that in your schedule as you're starting to figure out, training budgets for next year, figure all that out, because we would love to see you there again. So everybody, thank you to Shane for not showing up. This was a good podcast, sans Shane. So thanks, Shane, for being busy this week. I do appreciate that. And chat room, I will be around for a bit, and otherwise I will try to get these out in a timely fashion, and we will see you all next week.